What's up, everybody? The Popa has passed, and according to the prophecies of St. Malachi, that means we are quickly approaching Judgment Day. And after watching everything in Clown World last week, that might not be such a bad thing. I really couldn't bring myself to waste time talking about that clown show, but I might have to point a couple things out about all that. So, Pope Francis, 88, a humble reformer who sought to make the church more inclusive, that's kind of a dangerous word, much to the ire of traditionalists, has passed. Francis was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires in 1936, the son of Italian immigrant parents, then rose through the ranks as a Jesuit priest in his home country of Argentina. Now, I've talked a lot about the Jesuit order and their proclivities towards international espionage, but that doesn't mean that they're all bad. I don't know anything about Francis, so I'm not going to say anything bad about him. Recently, I've been listening to a series of lectures about the first French Jesuits in America and their dealings with the Iroquois. And a lot of them out there on the ground level were the real deal. I mean, they were legitimately trying to spread the word and save souls. But you can have truly pious men out in the field that are reporting back to their superiors, and their superiors using that knowledge in nefarious ways. But I would think that you don't rise to the highest ranks without being part of the club there. And like they point out here, he became the spiritual leader to nearly 1.4 billion people, which makes him an incredibly influential man. To put things mildly, the church was facing a lot of controversy at that time too, which again doesn't mean that he had anything to do with any of that, but was probably on the cleanup side of things. And I hope I haven't ran off all of my catholic viewers. I only say it that way. It's not to be mocking. It's because I get checked by the algo. And I know for billions of people out there, it's just about church and about Jesus. But when you have any organization that influences that many people, then there's going to be people at the top that use it for their own purposes. And basically, since its inception, it's been used to gain secular power, with a lot of popas in history that would make our modern politicians look like choir boys. So I'm not saying anything bad about Catholics, just like I'm not saying anything bad about Americans when I talk about our problems with Washington. It's just a management problem. So, like I said, I don't know much about Francis personally, hadn't really kept up with him. But what I have noticed is a bunch of keywords that have always been associated with him, like inclusivity and here being in favor of the poorest and most marginalized. These are just words that have been used to say, hey, we're going to implement social change here, whether you like it or not. And I'm drawing a complete blank on this archbishop's name, but a while back he wrote a scathing letter about the deep church and how a faction within the church is working right along with all the dark state actors in every nation around the world. So, to put things as respectfully as I can, I've had my suspicions about the motives of Francis, and I'll just leave it at that. Do the prophecies of St. Malachi suggest that we are living in the end times? I don't know, do they? I've heard quite a few people mention these in the last few years, saying that Francis was supposed to be the last popa. The prophecy consists of 112 short Latin descriptions of future popas. The prophecies were discovered in 1590 and attributed to Malachy, which is usually spelled with an I, so maybe it's Malachy. But I know there's a lot of famous Malachis, so I'm sticking with that one. Each description indicates one identifying trait for each future popa, beginning with Celestine II, who was elected in 1130. In some instances, the description hit home in an uncanny way. They have led to centuries of speculation that the prophecy might be a real one. Now, the way this is written up is strange because it was discovered by somebody in the church in 1590. And I'm using air quotes on the word discovered. It was discovered by Pope Sixtus, whose tenure began 442 years after the first pope's rule. And the passage suggests that he is in the middle of the papal lineage, thus indicating the end of the world would come 442 years later in 2027. Well, wait a minute. St. Peter was supposed to be the first popa in 30 AD. But they say here, Sixtus was 442 years after that, right in the middle, and the world would end 442 years later in 2027. So I don't know if they're using the statico-domini dating here, but 2027 minus 884 is 1143. Using this math, the first popa would have been in 1143. Which makes me think of the false decretals. Let's handle the prophecy here first, though. So this was supposedly discovered in 1590, was written 400 years earlier, allegedly, and the description of the future John the 12th in the 1300s is Du Sutter Osed from the bony shoemaker. And he turned out to be the son of a shoemaker. His family name was Osa, which means bone. In another example, Ilium et Rosa was the phrase used to describe who would become Urban VIII, 1623 to 44, whose family coat of arms was covered with lilies and roses, or Lilium et Rosa in Latin. But Malachy's prophecy has been cast into doubt by the fact that the descriptions become vague from the 16th century on, or about the time the prophecy was, quote, discovered in the Roman archives. So it was allegedly discovered in 1590, was incredibly accurate for the last 442 years, but after the point it was, quote, discovered, then it wasn't quite so accurate. However, there have been a few good matches since then. The phrase pastor et nata, meaning shepherd and sailor. And hey, we all just learned that the word pastor just means shepherd. But that was attributed to John the 13th, and he hailed from Venice, historically a city of sailors. And on the day he took office, he indicated that the goal of his pontificate was to be a good shepherd. Now, that's the only prophecy they reference after 1590 in this article. And if that's the most accurate prediction, then the other ones must not even be close. And if people want to believe in this prophecy, then they can make themselves fit into it, you know? But I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of videos coming out saying that, oh, this is it. This is the end. But we'll see. I guess the thing to look out for is the book says that Francis would be the last before Peter the Roman, who comes to lead the church through the trials and tribulations before the destruction of Rome and the final judgment. Now, I got to say, I'm really skeptical of this. I've came across a lot of books that people say that they discovered, and it was this ancient manuscript. And this first came on the scene in 1590. Everything before that was pretty accurate. Then after that, not so much so. But they're saying that Francis is the last popa before the 7 years trials and tribulations. And I've talked quite a few times about the red heifer sacrifice that may or may not have already happened. And that is supposed to set into motion the 7 years of trials and tribulation. So Malachy's prophecy by itself is suspect to me, but when I combine these two, well, then it adds a little more credence to it. So let's weigh this out real quick. 2013, Francis becomes Popa. Could the Greys have said, well, okay, he's prophesied to be the last Popa, so we better find our red heifer? Well, about 7 years later, around 2020 roughly, was when the Texas rancher had specifically bred these red cows and came up with 5 candidates that then have to make it to 3 years old without any blemishes to be eligible for the sacrifice. And that was around October 15th, 2023. So I'd say this could be prophecy, but I can also easily say that it was planned out that way according to the prophecy. But it's definitely interesting that both of these events have happened right around the same time here. So I guess we need to be watching out for Peter the Roman. The final statement in the passage states, in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will reign Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep and will be greatly persecuted, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge the people. The end. Now, the persecution of Christians is something that has happened at some place almost all throughout history and still in places today. But I don't see anybody really going after the Catholics right now, other than their internal conflicts, which I talked about earlier. But according to this, they will be greatly persecuted, and then the seven-hilled city is Rome. So then we'd see the end of Rome. Even though this modern text has garnered considerable interest, and that's why I'm doing this video, because I know a lot of people are going to start making videos saying, okay, Francis is gone, now we're in the end days, this is the last popa. So I thought I'd try to give you guys the skinny on this before all the videos come out. But most modern scholars dismiss it as a political forgery of the 16th century, and the history of the church has a lot of forgeries. The first 74 mottos appear rather accurate, while the remaining mottos become more ambiguous. So the first 74 were before it was, quote, discovered in 1590. It's not hard to be accurate about your predictions on things that have already happened. But then from that point on, it's not been quite so accurate. For me, the biggest pro for all of this is that it just happens to line up with the red heifer sacrifice. But you got to ask, is that prophecy or is that planning? Because if you know all the facts here, you understand you're dealing with some people that are playing the long game. And there's a lot of people out there like the Temple Institute who want to kick things into motion to bring about the Mashiach, but it's not their decision. And one man's Mashiach is another man's Antichrist. I personally would go with the closest thing we have to a direct quote from Jesus, which was written 40 or 50 years afterwards, where Matthew wrote of the judgment day, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. So according to that, nobody knows when the end's going to come. I think there's something about like a thief in the night in there somewhere. But I wonder how much the bishops believe in this prophecy. In the upcoming conclave, they may be looking out for Peter the Roman. Right now, if you're a bishop from somewhere in Italy and you've got Peter in your name, then you might just be thinking, yep, that's me. So I guess we'll see who gets elected and see if it lines up. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.